Okay, just want to start lecture 5 on behavioral observation. Behavior is described as a relatively discrete event. It's what people do. It's oftentimes the ultimate outcome of interest. It's most often why people come to a practitioner to change their behavior. And we'll talk about behavior observation as the most direct of all methods, meaning that it's the most accurate indicator of success because it's the closest of all methods. And when we talk about behavior, we talk about two different types of behavior. Overt behavior. Overt behavior is something that can be observed by at least theoretically if people are around, such as time spent with a child or spouse, time spent interacting, by nursing home residents, number of treated completement tasks, number of times a parent compliments his or her child, some other ideas, number of AA meetings attended, number of nights a child went to bed when requested, number of hours slept each night, number of times a child is disciplined a day, number of hours studying for your research exam. So those are all overt behaviors. They can be observed by others. The other type of behavior occurs within the individual and cannot be observed directly by others. These are feelings and thoughts. They can be positive or self-deprecating or irrational feelings of thoughts, such as feelings of depression, anxiety, positive thoughts such as self-esteem, marital satisfaction. When we think about recording behaviors, we can think about them in two different ways: continuous recording and sampling of recording. Continuous recording is where we record every behavior as it occurs. Sampling is where we get an efficient, practical, and representative sample of the behavior. We use continuous recording when we, most likely when we can observe every, when a behavior doesn't occur very often, such as temper tantrums, the number of hours each slept every day, the number of AA meetings attended per week. Sampling behaviors are when they just occur too often for somebody to record them and record every behavior as it occurs, such as if you had somebody record every negative thought they had, if you had somebody record, if you had somebody record every time they were in pain, if they were in chronic pain. And there are 3 different types of sampling. They're fairly easy to think about. We'll talk about time sampling some more, but client sampling means, if you had a lecture hall of 200-300 students, it would be impossible to observe all their behavior. So what client sampling allows you to do is just randomly select 5 to 10 people that you wanted to observe in that classroom and observe them. Situational sampling is whether you want to observe somebody in a particular situation, such as home, school, work, or you could get more specific with that. In terms of time sampling, there's two different types that we're going to talk about. There's something called pre-selected time periods, and in the book it's called momentary time sampling, and that's observing whether the target problem is occurring at all or rating the intensity of the event, such as a pain level. You could set up pre-selected time periods, such as when you wake up, noon, 5 p.m. and bedtime and using those as your pre-selected time periods, record the pain level. And momentary time sampling can also be performed by practitioners or relevant others. Examples on page 134, as long as, of course, there are covert behaviors. And then spot checking behavior is simply record every instance in a time period, so that you would select a particular representative time sampling and record every instance in that time period. So if a child had a problem with cursing, you could set up a time period from 5 to 6 o'clock at night, and then record every instant within that time period. Methods for observing a behavior. Obviously, we have self-report observation, and that requires self-observation, and that can cover both overt or covert behavior. And then we have direct observation, and that requires an outside observer, so that's limited to overt behavior. I asked you as far as what are some problems with with self-monitoring and covert behavior. And some of the problems, this is usually when I stop, ask for a little class participation, but so I want you to think about this a little bit. And the problems, one problem is reactivity, especially with self-monitoring, because and also with direct observation, because what reactivity is when you introduce a method of observing that can interrupt, that can change the very thing that you're trying to monitor. You can have problems, and thus problems with accuracy as a result of accuracy. If you're self-monitoring, you may have problems with your environment if you don't select good time samples, and even if you do, sometimes you don't have control over your environment. And lastly, it can be costly and impractical to do behavior observation. So even though it's the best method for um, for measuring client behavior, it is the most can be the most costly and impractical, depending on how you go about it. Guidelines for behavior observation, and you've already done your client assessment, so you would do a similar preliminary assessment, and as in there you would then I think the next section asks you to specify the targets, which are the behaviors that need to be changed, and then prioritize those, decide which behaviors to record. Some behaviors can't be recorded, which behaviors lend themselves to be recorded. Decide who's going to record the data, if it's going to be self-monitoring or somebody else is going to collect the data. Decide when and where to observe the behavior. You want to standardize that. Decide on continuous or time sampling or some type of sampling. And it's very important, and I know I'll say this over and over, but to standardize that. Continuing with guidelines, you want to select a recording method, and it can be portable, unobtrusive, likely. You want to pick something portable and unobtrusive, likely to be used, enjoyable to be used. It's hard enough to get clients to collect the data, so you want to make it as easy as you can. And something, if they're just counting something, you can, suggest they put some coins in their pocket and move them from one pocket to another. Another suggestion is, have them use, a little golf counter and have them count behaviors in that way. You also want to design a usable recording form. Throughout the chapters are examples of bare bones, what I call bare bones recording forms. You want to customize for your client and make those as easy to use with instructions, and so that they'll use those. And again, making those as usable as possible, and you can enlist the help of your client to design those forms so that they'll most be likely to be used as well. Training and retraining the observers. If you are using observers, it's important to give them some preliminary training. And then I know if you're trained for a job, at Wendy's, McDonald's, those I've worked at McDonald's, and we had to watch training videos every so often, because as you do a job, you forget things, you become a little more lax about the way you're supposed to do the job. And it's the same thing with behavior observation. So it's important to train and retrain the observers. And then as a part of the form, you may want to record the environmental context of the behavior. We talked about the ABC model, I believe it was either in chapters 3 or 4, where you collect what happened before the behavior and what happened after the behavior, so it's the antecedents and consequences, and that will help you in contextualizing behavior, and hopefully in designing, in figuring out some patterns and intervention, how to intervene with this client. Methods for quantifying, recording, quantifying the behaviors. We have 3 different types: frequency recording, duration recording, and interval recording. Frequency recording is simply just counting the number of behaviors. Duration recording is recording how long different instances of the behavior happens. And interval recording I'll talk to you about, but it's sort of a combination of both. And I won't spend. I want to explain what that is, but it's really intended. Intended for not for a clinical setting, more for a research setting, in my opinion. And I'll explain why. Frequency recording is the number of times a behavior occurs during a given observation period. So whether that's a continuous period or a sampling time period, and it's used when the number of times a behavior occurs need to be increased or decreased, and the behavior must have a clear beginning and end, and different occurrences must last the same duration. We see the recording form. If you'll turn to page 143 and look at figure 5. So an example of a frequency recording would be anything that you could count, basically. You know, we went over some of the overt behaviors before, and some of those that fit this bill are, you know, number of AA meetings attended, the number of hours slept each night, the number of times a child is disciplined a day, the number of hours studying for an exam, those types of things. And you can see, if you look at figure 5.5 on page 143, how you could record for date, you know, just and putting the number of times, just ticky-tack, you know, and recording those as you go along. You can see how you'd want to customize this for your client. One thing that I don't want is I've had a student just copy and paste this into their measurement package. That isn't going to be adequate. I want instructions, a client name, recorder name, you know, specified behaviors to observe, the time periods. This is a sort of a bare bones. And then also what I suggest is to record the time a behavior occurs, and you know, what the behavior was, and then you could have you know, a sheet of these each day, or at the end of the day just put the total so that you could total it up for each day. And when the importance of the time, I'll talk about on this slide. If you have 2 observers for example, the number of times a child behaves in a certain way, and you have a list of behaviors that you're trying to stop, and a mother and a father are doing that, then if the observation times are the same, then you just compare the frequencies. However, if different, for example, if the mother is able to observe 2 hours from 4 to 6, and the father is able to observe from 4 to 7, so the observation times are different, then you have to calculate a rate. You would take the total number. For example, the mother was able to observe in her 3 hours 9 times, so you divide that by 3 per hour, so you would come up with a rate of 3 per hour, and then you would take the father, who he would be observing, did I say, okay, let me back up. The mother was observing 5 to 7, I think we said, and the father was 5 to 8. So if the mother was observing, let's make the math easy, 6 divided by 2 hours, it would be 3 per hour, and the father was observing 4, and he was observing 3 hours. That's 12 divided by 3 hours. From 5 to 8, he would be observing 4 per hour. So the mother would be observing 3 problems per hour, and the father would be observing 4 per hour. And this is sometimes a little easier to do on the board, but if you are having problems with this, there's an example on page 144, figure 4.6, that talks about, that gives you another example on how to calculate the rate. The reliability, which is the consistency between, we talked about inter-observer reliability. I think that was, I still need to record that part of the lecture, but we talked about that in Research 1. We talked about that in certainly Advanced Standing. That's where we want to talk about the reliability between two observers. And the way you would calculate that, if the observation times are the same, then you would simply take, and this is how you would calculate it if the observation times are the same. So let's use our same example. They're both able to observe from 5 to 8. The mother sees 8 problems, the father sees 10. So you would take the smaller count, 8, divide it by 10, multiply it by 100, and you would get 80% agreement. And I asked, what is the potential problem with this equation? If you were just using the form on 5.5, the problem with this is that you don't know if the 8 problems that the mother observed can be encompassed in the 10 problems that the father solved. For example, is there complete overlap there? Are all 8 of the problems problems that the father also solved? If they're not, then this would not be, just using the smaller count divided by a larger count, be an accurate accurate measure of inner observer reliability. How do you fix this problem? You fix it with a statistic called kappa. And I don't want to make you statisticians, but we are going to talk about kappa later on in the lecture, just so that when you're looking at a research article and you run across kappa, you'll know what it is. It is a measure of inner observer reliability, and it's the best measure of inner reliability, observability. And certainly when talking about, you can also, in addition to doing the division, you can look at this visually. This is over weeks, the number of problems that a mother and father solve, and this is a visual analysis. I think I use this as an example in my inter-rater observability, but here you see, what would you see here is that the mother tends to, well, always sees fewer problems than the father, so that would give you some information to work with. But within 5, they're within 5 each time. You know, obviously real data would look probably somewhat different than this. This is just an example. Okay, we've talked about frequency recording. Duration recording is a time a behavior occurs during a given observation period. And we either talk about the time of the behavior, which is simply the time perhaps of temper tantrums, because temper tantrums vary in length, so we could talk about the time of temper tantrums. Latency is from the time from which you request something until the time that it actually happens. So the time that you ask a child to go to bed until they actually go to bed. The time from when you ask them to brush their teeth until they actually brush their teeth. Inner response interval is the time between the two same behaviors that you would either normally want to, all these want to increase or decrease. In this example, you'd want to decrease it. This would, the example that I have for this is the time between the child wetting their bed. So it's the inner response interval. So it's the time between the same behavior. So obviously if you had an intervention into place, the smaller that inner response interval got would be better. Or it could be also the time a child makes their bed without being asked, and you would want to increase that interval. So again, it's used when the time of behavior occurs needs to be increased or decreased, and the behavior must have a clear beginning and ending. Just as in the duration recording, if you have two people observing the same behavior, then you would just compare the durations. If you had a mother and father, if they're both home on a Saturday, comparing the durations of temper tantrums, then you would just compare how much time that child spent in temper tantrums. However, if the rates used in observations times differed, you would what you would do in that situation, you would do something similar. You would take the duration and divide it by the time. So if the father observed an hour over 6 hours, and the mother observed 3 hours over if the mother observed 3 hours over 12 hours, then you would simply produce a rate where the father observed, I can't rewind this thing. Let's say the father observed an hour, or I think I said an hour over 6 hours, so that would be 1 hour every 6 times. The mother observed 3 hours over 12 hours. That would be 1 every 4 hours. So that's how you would compare it. And you would break it down to the most common denominator, and this time you have hours. You might have to do minutes. The reliability, it's the same. It's the smallest. If the observation times are the same, you would take the smallest duration and divide it by the largest duration and multiply it by 100. The potential problem again with this would be that you're not sure if all the duration time of the smaller duration can be encompassed but in the larger duration. For instance, let's say father observes all day and only sees a child in a temper tantrum all day, sees them for 30 minutes. The mother sees them for an hour and a half all day. Then that would be 30 divided by 90 minutes. That would be 33.33 times 100, 33%. If they both observed all day, meaning you would have to, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Potential problems with this formula is that you're not sure that the father may be including time that his wife didn't see. So that's the problem with the formula. And again, we'll talk about the kappa equation. But in talking about the recording form on page 146, that's an example of a recording form for duration. And again, it doesn't include it includes the date, but it doesn't include the time, which I would recommend, because that would solve that problem. You can match up the date and the time and the event to make sure that you're talking about the same event. Now, interval recording is used when frequency or duration isn't possible. An example of this form is on page 149, figure 5.8, and the observation times are partitioned in regularly small intervals. I say 5 minutes. In the book it talks about 10 to 15 seconds. It's your definition of what small intervals are and what you're measuring. And what you're recording is, if you look on page 149, you'll see that you're recording within intervals. For each minute, you're recording 10 intervals. So each interval is going to be 6 seconds. Same thing for the second minute, because it's also 10 intervals, and the same through the 10th minute. So you're going to have 10 intervals by 10 minutes, 100 intervals that you're going to have to record for. And you will circle the plus mark if the target behavior occurred, and a minus mark if it didn't occur. Now, whether the recording made, you can define it, whether the behavior occurred at all, or whether the behavior occurred throughout the entire interval, throughout the entire 6 seconds, or the behavior occurred at a particular time during the interval, if it occurred at the beginning or at the end. So that's something that you would have to decide upon at the beginning. Again, looking at the recording form, I want to read you. I always read this to students to, I think, underline that this is most of the time in practical and clinical settings. On reading from page 157, the second paragraph, full paragraph. In interval recording, a period of observation is selected, for example 30 minutes, and then divided in equal blocks of intervals, usually of rather short durations, for example 10 to 15 seconds. The behavior is then recorded as either occurring or not occurring for each interval. One way this is done is for the observers to have a miniature tape recorder with an earphone and a tape on which the tone has been recorded at pre-selected intervals, such as 10 seconds. And I just read that to show you, to imagine yourself with this thing in your ear going off every 10 seconds, or in the form that we looked at, it was every 6 seconds. And I think you know, you can just imagine yourself, the tone going off that often. You would be, I would at least get very confused about what I was doing, and I think it would have to require a bit of training to do that. It might even require some, you know, videotaping of the session and then doing the recording. So I just wanted to make a note. It's difficult to do in the clinical setting. I have seen one article out of all the single system articles I've looked at, and in my opinion, it's designed more for research settings. We're going to finally talk about kappa. Additional considerations about inter-observer reliability. Just to note that if the more frequently occurring your behavior is, you tend to have higher reliability. Reliability is also inflated by chance agreement between observers. By chance agreement, there are things that just in statistics happen by chance, and we control for that. And that's what kappa does. It's a widely used statistics that controls for chance agreement. And again, you may see kappa used in the literature in a peer review article, And just to give you some gauge, unlike a correlation coefficient, which ranges from a -1 to a 1, kappa ranges just from 0 to 1. And the guidelines where 1 is perfect agreement between your two observers, and between 0.75 and 1 is good, 0.6 and 0.74 is fair, and less than 0.6 is poor. Earlier, we talked about observing people in their natural environment. Sometimes that's not possible. If you were to, as a practitioner, follow your client around for a while, or you might, get arrested for stalking. But what we have when we can't follow as practitioners, when we can't follow our clients around, are what we call analog situations, and these are discussed in the book on page 151, and they're simply constructed situations designed to elicit a representative sample of behaviors. And you want these behaviors in analog situations to be representative of behavior in a natural environment. We're going to talk about 4 different types. And as we go along talking about this, the enactment, for example, as we go along in the list, they get closer to the natural environment. And I think you'll see that, be able to tell that. The first type of analog situation we're going to talk about is paper and pencil. A good example, I was involved in a foster parent research where we gave foster parents over the phone, we gave them, I think, read them over the phone. They also had copies of them, paper and pencil, and they gave them situations difficult situations that foster parents may come up with. For example, what do you do if your foster child wets the bed every night or every other night? And then they would write down what they would do. And then on the basis of that, we would judge their foster effectiveness, their potential foster effectiveness, because these were foster parent applicants. So some of the things we would be looking for would be, would you consider taking the child to the doctor to eliminate any medical reasons why they may be doing this? Would you not judge, make sure you tell the child that this isn't their this isn't their fault. We would involving the child if they're older and cleaning up their bed so that they can take care of it, and then so things like that. I think there was a 4th one, but I can't remember it. Things like that to judge whether they would be good foster parents. That's an example of a paper and pencil test. Audio and videotape. Same example might be that the foster parent and foster child, you would see a foster parent and foster child interacting in a situation that would be troublesome, and at the end of the audio tape or videotape, you would then ask the potential foster parent, well, what would you do in this situation? The next example, role playing. um, you would have the one of the suggestions in the book is to have the uh, foster, a recent example of a study where the practitioner with foster parents would play the foster child, maybe saying, I'm, I, I don't know, I don't know, I don't want to go to church with you, or I don't um, want to go to school. Maybe that would be a better one. I don't want to go to school, and you would actually role in the foster parent would actually role play within the practitioner's office these situations. An enactment would be where the example, will get away from the foster examples, where a family might be given a task. I don't know if you've ever taken this task, but you're given a list of about 50 items and asked to choose 20 items you would pick on a desert island, and the um, the theory behind it is the more people that you have doing it, the better result that you get. So you give this family this task, and then you observe how they interact in this example, and look at their patterns of behavior, who takes charge, patterns of communication, who doesn't say anything, who gets blamed, all the family dynamics you can observe by giving the family this task. So those are examples of analog situations. When we talk about behavioral observations, there's just some final notes that I want to mention about ensuring accurate observations. You want to make sure that your samples of times and place are representative, they're standardized. We've talked about this before. Standardization is very important, because if they're not standardized, then what you may be observing is the differences in times and places. It's important to train and retrain the observers. We've talked about that before. Monitoring the observers. It's important to unobtrusively monitor observers to make sure they're doing their job correctly. Obviously, attending to observers' needs. If they're fatigued, they're not going to give you accurate data. Once you get the data, it's important to use the observations, because it's nothing more frustrating that when you're involved in a behavioral observation, you've collected all this data if that data isn't used. And that can certainly undermine the trust with your client, undermine motivation. So when you're involved with a behavior, when you're asking your client to observe their behavior, it's very important for them to use that. For you, it's very important for you to use those observations in their treatment. If you're using external observers, you want to make them unobtrusive, blending into the environment, or maybe behind a glass where the client can't see them if you're dealing with children, and then you don't inform the external observers of the expected outcomes, so that they don't come up with biased results, because sometimes if you tell somebody what you expect them to see, that will bias their results. after we discuss all Chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8, we'll discuss other issues of reliability after we, again, discuss all the measurement issues. So, I'm going to stop Chapter 5.